Behold, I come, blessed is he that watcheth. And our topic this morning, as we have on the screen there, and they stood upon their feet, and in the same hour there was a great earthquake. Now, as that title suggests, this morning, as we continue working our way through Revelation chapter 11, we're going to be considering the details of this second great earthquake in the apocalypse. Now, we left our class yesterday and we painted a broad brush overview of Revelation chapter 11. And we made the point that there were three major players in this chapter. We looked at the first two verses and said there are the brothers and sisters given the title, the temple, the altar, and the holy city. And we said that the brothers and sisters in Christ would be measured. It would be a time measure, and they would feel awful persecution over a period of 42 months, 1,260 years. That's the major player, the first major player. We then said the second major player in the chapter were given four titles, my two witnesses, the two olive trees and the two lampstands, and called these two prophets. These would be the two witnesses, the political and religious anti-papal witnesses who stood against the papacy. And what they did, brothers and sisters, by virtue of the fact that they gave as good as they got, they fought. They wouldn't take things lying down, and they therefore provided a buffer, as it were, to our brothers and sisters. Oh yes, our brothers and sisters were persecuted. But by virtue of the fact that there were two anti-papal witnesses who went out and fought, they therefore gave some measure of relief to our brothers and sisters, these two witnesses. And our third major player in this drama would be the Catholic system, the God of the earth, the beast that ascendeth out of the abyss, and twice called in verse 10, those that dwell upon the earth. And we left our class yesterday morning and we posed two questions, or a question. Why is it that 42 months is attributed to the saints, 1,260 years, and yet with the witnesses, it's the same period of time that the witnesses would speak out, but it's written differently? Why didn't God say, well, the saints would be persecuted for 42 months and the witnesses would speak out for 42 months? Why write them differently? Two reasons. The first reason, brothers and sisters, with respect to the same time period expressed two different ways, the first reason that's there is to make sure we clearly understand God is telling us the saints are contrasted to the anti-papal witnesses. Be very clear, they're not the same group. That's the first reason why these two, it's the same time period, but why they're written two different ways. But the second reason is that each of these time periods has a different beginning and a different end. Now, I don't have time to go through with you the fascinating detail about when the treading down of the brothers and sisters began. But I'll just show you the dates. If some of you are new to this, jot the dates down. And by the way, if anybody would like, 15, 20 minutes at some stage during our time together, if you want to come and see me, we can sort of get together, 2, 3, 4, half a dozen of us, and I'll show you some amazing things, give you a flow chart and some maps and show you how this treading down of the holy city began and how it ended, and all the fascinating history and detail that surrounded that. Be that as it may, what I simply want to say with respect to the treading down of the holy city, it began, brothers and sisters, the clue to when it began is given to us in Revelation 13, verse 2 and verses 4 and 5. Now, all I'm going to say is this. Some of you are very familiar with this material. Revelation 13, a dragon gives power and authority to a beast. And the beast with its mouth blasphemes God, and the saints are worn out for 42 months. So it mentions 42 months in Revelation 13. And when you get your head around Revelation 13 verses 2 and verses 4 and 5, you say, right, when this dragon, whoever it was, of Revelation 13, gave power to the beast, whoever the beast was, that's when the treading down of the holy city began. Let me say this simply. The dragon was the Catholic emperors in the East, in Constantinople. And the beast of Revelation 13 is the Bishop of Rome. So, in Constantinople, two men were instrumental, and they were 75 years apart. One of them was Justinian. 75 years later, Focus. Justinian rolled the ball, got the ball rolling, and said to the bishop in Rome, "You're the head bishop." It took 75 years for that to become solidified. And 75 years after Justinian, who gave that declaration, by the way, in AD 530 through AD 533, 75 years later, in comes Focus and says, "I'm going to ratify what the Emperor Justinian said 75 years before," and Focus imperially recognises the bishop in Rome as the head bishop and gives him the opportunity to transfer it on. Ecclesiastically, the bishop in Rome, the beast, had the same power as the emperor in Constantinople. So, that's all I want to say on that note, because I want to really focus on the witnesses, because they are the main thrust of Revelation 11. So if you want to speak with me at some time, I'll show you some terrific maps, and the kind of maps we're going to be looking at was the dragon. So get all this, flick, flick, flick. Did you get all that? So that was, if those had had 10 cups of coffee, you would have seen those slides and you would have all got it inside your mind. All right, so let's say this, brothers and sisters, with the starting point of the 42 months, it started with, well, after 75 years from Justinian, it was ratified by the Emperor Focus, the dragon in Constantinople, in 608, 610. That's when the witnesses of Revelation 11 began to be trodden down, and they would be trodden down for 1,260 years. So you add 1,260 years to 608, 610, you get 1868 to 1870. In 610 AD, the papacy, the beast, was given temporal power. Military, economic and political power. And the Pope would call the shots and do what he liked. For 1,260 years, he had temporal power. And he lost it. He lost his temporal power 1260 years later in 1868 through 1870, when Giuseppe Garibaldi in his 1,000 red shirts and Victor Emmanuel II, the King of Sardinia, marched up the Italian peninsula determined to kick the Pope out. And they did. In 1870, the Pope was kicked out as king, and Victor Emmanuel II became King of Italy. What an amazing thing. So there we are. Temporal power for the Pope for 1,260 years, and lost it. So those two verses, Revelation 11 verses 1 and 2, need to be set side by side with Revelation 13 verse 2 and verses 4 and 5. That's all I need to note. If you haven't got any notes in your margin, then you might like to note that, brothers and sisters, that's when the 42 months begin, and that's when the 42 months ends with respect to that. Okay, all I need to say about that, we need to move now into the main thrust of Revelation 11, and that's these two witnesses that are killed in Revelation 11 and that come back to life. Now, when did the two witnesses of Revelation 11, verses 3 and 4, when do they begin to witness, and when do they cease their witnessing? Well, you know, brothers and sisters, the key, just like here with the 42 months, we found the same expression in Revelation 13, which gives us the clue as to when that began. Likewise, we get the key to when the two witnesses began in Revelation chapter 12. Because in Revelation 12, we see the same expression, 1,260 days out of Revelation 11. And in Revelation 12, 1,260 days. Now, I'm suggesting, brothers and sisters, that these two witnesses of Revelation 11 began to witness in 312. I just want you to come with me, if you will, to Revelation chapter 12. Familiar ground to some, not so familiar to others. I want to pick up a couple of key verses out of Revelation chapter 12. Revelation 12 is the key to when the witnesses of chapter 11 began. And then you'll find in chapter 11 when they ceased their witnessing. All right, now we're going to pick up the verse 6, Revelation 12. And the woman, whoever she was, fled into the wilderness. She fled into a wilderness state. She was banished. She was exiled. She was cut off. She was called a heretic. Whoever this woman was, she flees into a wilderness state where she hath a place prepared of God that they should feed her there. Now here's your key. Here's the same expression as we find in Revelation 11 and verses 3 and 4, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now this is our key when the witnesses began. Who's this woman that runs into a wilderness state? What does that mean? Well, what we need to do to follow the flow of the story in chapter 12 is we need to turn the page. We just read verse 6. You turn the page and you pick up the story and you start reading verse 14 to get the flow of who this woman is, right? We read verse 6, now we read verse 14. And to the woman, whoever she was, there were given the 2 wings of the great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished. Now here's the same expression, or the same time period I should say, 1,260 years. But it's called a time, times, and dividing of time. In verse 6 it was 1,260 days. And all of a sudden, God changes the expression. Why? To connect us to Daniel 7. But that's another story. Time, 1 year. Times, 2 years. Half a time, 6 months. Do your math. 1 year, 2 years, a half a year. Add all those days together and you get 1,260 days. Right? It's exactly the same time period. It's the same time period of verse 6 in chapter 12. God changes it to say, hey, you need to go back to Daniel 7. Because there's some interesting things back there, right? But that's another story. So here's this woman. We're trying to pick up when the witnesses begin. So here's a woman running into the wilderness and she's nourished for 1,260 days. Now here is something interesting, brothers and sisters, as we just kind of like unpack a little bit about Revelation 12. She runs away. Who's the woman? Well, there are 3 women in chapter 12. The first woman is introduced to us in chapter 12 as a woman clothed with the sun, a moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars. She is the truth gone bad. She is the Catholic state religion. Clothed with the sun? Oh yeah. Constantine comes on the scene in 312 over in the west and he says, where's me mother? Where's me mum? Ah, there she is, the Catholic sect. Oh, there's a lot of other religious sects around the place. The Catholic sect. I will choose you and clothe you with the sun. So Constantine lifted up this religious group and gave them political authority. She is the Catholic system. Well, there were other religious groups running around saying, what? Christians having to do with politics? No way. Christians having to do things with the emperor? No way. And so here comes a woman in Revelation 12 that says, we want nothing to do with this Catholic state woman, this religious woman that Constantine has elevated. We want nothing to do with this newly elected state church. And so there's a peeling off, a protesting woman against this Catholic woman that Constantine has elevated. So this woman that peels off, call her the Protestants. For the first time there is a protesting against Catholicism. In the very first instance, they were the Donatists of North Africa. We will have nothing to do with this new Catholic woman. And so another woman emerges who is a protesting religious witness. There's your first witness. There are two of them, one political, one religious. So here are the protesting women, and they run away. They are caught. Well, Constantine said, "You're not going to become a Catholic? No way. Then get out." And they were placed in a wilderness stay. Who is the earth? It says there in verse 16, the earth helped this Protestant woman. Well, the earth, brothers and sisters, way back there in the very beginning in 312 and thereafter, the earth was a group of political blokes who were called the Circumcellions, or who, although not being religious, they would never ever be shackled with Roman Catholicism. You've got two witnesses standing against the new Catholic elected state. The Circumcellions of North Africa and the Donatists of North Africa are the woman and the earth, the religious and political witnesses who would be severely persecuted by the serpent or the dragon. The serpent and the dragon is Constantine in the first instance, his sons thereafter, and all the emperors thereafter that ruled from Constantinople. Where's the altar and the temple and the holy city in Revelation 12? We've got the two witnesses in Revelation 12 that are locked across to Revelation 11. There's your first two witnesses, the religious witness, and there's the political witness, the Donatists and the Circumcellions. If those two witnesses there correlate to the two witnesses of Revelation 11, where would the temple and the holy city and the altar be? Brothers and sisters, right there. So there they are, all three of them, right there in Revelation 12. That come out of Revelation 11. There are your two witnesses, the woman and the earth, and the remnant of her seed is the temple, the altar, and the holy city. So the two witnesses of Revelation 11 began their witnessing with Constantine in 312 AD. Let's have a look at that, brothers and sisters. 312, they witnessed and spoke out for 1,260 years. You add 1,260 years to 312 and you get 1572, which is where we pick up the story in a moment in Revelation 11. 1572 is when they began to be killed. And those of us in this audience who will know the amazing events that took place in 1572, which was the slaughter of the Huguenots on St. Bartholomew's Day in France. All right, let's pick that up. All got that? How's your coffee? All working with you? Let me have a good look. You're all awake. You are all awake still just. Two witnesses. They began their witnessing in 312 when Constantine started to clothe this woman gone bad with political authority. There comes the Catholic State Church. And a protesting woman says, "No way." And Constantine says, "You're excommunicated, get out." And they went into a wilderness state. And God left them there for 1,260 years. And they would continue down through time. Originally the Donatists and the Circumcellions, but they would manifest themselves all the way through time as various witnesses, political and religious, standing against the God of the earth. All right, now let's put this on a time chart, brothers and sisters, and see how this works through Revelation chapter 11. So we've already said the witnesses, the political and religious anti-papal witnesses, began in 312. There they are, they're the woman and the earth of Revelation 12. So if you don't have next to Revelation 11 and verse 3, this cross-reference to Revelation 12 verse 6, and the cross-reference to Revelation 12 verse 14 and 17, let me recommend that you jot in your margins of Revelation 12 verse 3 those references there, because that is when these two witnesses as the woman and the earth began to witness in Revelation 11. All right, good cross-references to have. And they would witness for 1,260 years. And then, brothers and sisters, in 1572, from 312, they would begin to be slain, as written in Revelation chapter 11. And what happened in that particular time in 1572, there was this awful massacre in France on St. Bartholomew's Day, where the witnesses, note this, I don't want you to trip over this, I want you to note this very carefully. After 1260 years, in 1570, there's Catherine de' Medici, who stood there and supervised the slaying of the Huguenots. And Christine and I actually stood on the very spot that Catherine de' Medici stood as she supervised the slaying of these witnesses in France. These Huguenots, the Huguenots were a very powerful religious and political group. They became the epitome of Protestants throughout Europe. You might be scratching your head thinking, is this chapter really about France? Oh yeah. Now you listen to the evidence that we start to build up in our study this morning. This is all about France. No way, no doubt about that, brothers and sisters. So here we are, Catherine de' Medici supervising the slaying of the Huguenots. But I want you to note that the slaying of the witnesses in 1572 began. It began. Now look at this. Don't trip over this. It's something very important before we then start to tease some more of this information out. Let's just have a look at verse 7 of Revelation 11. To be careful about these couple of verses here. Right, Revelation chapter 11 and verse 7. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the two witnesses, the beast, the Catholic system, that ascendeth out of the abyss, shall make war against the two witnesses, and shall overcome them and kill them. Verse 7 is 1572. But the witnesses began to be slain. They began to be politically and religiously gagged. They began to be slain in verse 7. And they were slain, and they were slain, and they were slain. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. History doesn't happen in a blink. And it took 113 years until they were totally and utterly, politically and religiously gagged, killed. Because when you spill into verse 8, you come to verse 8. In verse 8 it says, and their dead bodies, the witnesses, shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Oh, what a verse that is, which we'll look at in a minute. Verse 8 is 1685. So when these witnesses were killed, and they were killed, and they were killed, they began to be killed in 1572, and a year would go by, and 2 years, and a dozen years, and 24 years, and 100 years, and we get 113 years later, when we're 1685 in verse 8, and they're gone. Politically and religiously, gone. So be careful of that. 1572 verse 7, between verse 7 and 8, there is 113 years, and then there they are, dead in verse 8. And we're 1685. And there's the dead bodies, and John's got his parchment out, and he's looking around, he can see all these dead bodies lying on the street. He's writing this stuff in Revelation chapter 11. So just be careful of that as we work through now a couple of more things in this area. So 1572 verse 7, 1685 in verse 8. All right, keep that in your mind, jot that in your margins if you will. 1572, where they began to be slain. Now what happened? Well, in 1572, there was this fellow that came on the scene, and his name was Henry of Navarre. He was a Huguenot. He was a leader of the Huguenots. Originally born a Catholic. But his mum said, it's not good, son, you need to be converted to become a Protestant. You need to be a Huguenot. So he was, and he was a Huguenot leader. And he was the king of Navarre. Now, Navarre is there. See that little green area there? There's France there. He is the king of Navarre, is Henry. Now, Henry's going to get married in 1572, and of all people, he's going to marry the daughter of Catherine de' Medici, who's just slain all these Huguenots, or is about to. A lot of political issues going on here. So Henry, the king of Navarre, comes into Paris, and he's going to marry the daughter of Catherine de' Medici. So in comes Henry, and all his Huguenot mates come in with him. They're going to have a big wedding. And so they're going to have a wedding. Well, all these Huguenots flood into Paris, and the people going, oh, there's something afoot here. And they go to the Catholic king of France, and they say, we think there's a conspiracy against you. We think these Huguenots are out to get you. We better get them before they get you. We better have a little plan. So we'll ring some bells. And when we ring some bells, we'll trap them in the city, and we'll get them. Well, Henry comes in to get married, and 6 days 6 days into his wedding, these Catholics ring these bells. And they slew, in one night, 3,000 Huguenots. And in the months that followed, they slew a further 68,000 witnesses. 71,000 Huguenots were slain by the beast that came out of the abyss, the Catholic system. Well, what was the Catholics' reaction to slaying all of these 71,000 witnesses? What was the Catholics' reaction? Well, brothers and sisters, their reaction is in verse 10. Have a read of verse 10. This is what the Catholics thought after they'd slain 71,000 Huguenot witnesses. They're beginning to be slain in verse 7. Well, verse 10, this is the Catholics' reaction. And they that dwell upon the earth, the Catholics, shall rejoice over the witnesses and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these two prophets, the witnesses, had tormented them, tormented those that dwell upon the earth. So what do? Well, there, brothers and sisters, you've got there a coin up there, and there's Pope Gregory the 13th on that coin, and you see on the back of that coin there is an angel with a cross and a sword, and there's another little angel there with a little canopy over there, no doubt looking on with delight and pleasure as they see the slaying of the witnesses. So the Catholics' reaction was, let's have a party. Let's invite our friends. Let's mint a coin of merriment to show that we've gotten rid of these witnesses that have tormented us all of these years. What a shocking thing, brothers and sisters. What a shocking thing. And our God in heaven looked down from heaven, and our Lord Jesus Christ looking down from heaven, seeing these things fulfilled, but it was not a nice thing to witness. The slaying of men, women and children by a system that was as dark and black as night. Well, brothers and sisters, Henry wasn't slain among those 3,000 witnesses in Paris. Henry got out by the skin of his teeth. And then we find that in 1598, Henry is no longer Henry of Navarre. Henry is now King Henry IV of France. He's now the King of France. He was a Huguenot leader. How do you become the King of France unless you're a Catholic? Well, he did get converted to Catholicism. He thought, oh, well, this city needs a mass. And by the way, if I'm going to be king and climb up the ladder of success, I'd better become a Catholic. So here's a Huguenot leader, and now he's become a Catholic. He's not Henry of Navarre. He's now Henry IV, the King of France, the first of the Bourbon kings in France. The first of the Bourbon kings. Louis XVI was the last of the Bourbon kings. Louis XVI got his head chopped off in the French Revolution. So you had these Bourbon kings. Henry IV is the first of them. Well, there he is. He's alive. He's the king. He's a Catholic king, but he's a Huguenot leader. Oh, I better do something for my fellow Huguenots. So he writes the Edict of Nantes, or Edict of Nantes, a religious toleration document. Now there's a copy of the Edict of Nantes, or Edict of Nantes, and there, brothers and sisters, is Nantes there in France. So here's Henry IV, the King of France, a Huguenot leader, and he writes a document to give religious freedom. You remember we said the witnesses began to be slain in 1572. They had their ups and their downs, and their ups and their downs, and their ups until 113 years later, and in verse 8, 1685, gone. Right? So this is a little up. This is a little up in the ups and downs of those 113 years. This is a toleration of religious freedom that Henry wrote for his Huguenot mates or friends or religious cohorts. Well, brothers and sisters, Henry IV, the King of France, previously Henry of Navarre, he was killed by a fanatical Catholic. And Henry IV's son, Louis XIII, comes on the throne and hates the Huguenots. He wants to have more parties, he wants to kill more Huguenots, and he wants to mint more coins. But Louis XIII, the son of Henry IV, is not strong enough to remove the Edict of Nantes. But Louis XIV, who next comes on the throne, Henry IV, Louis XIII, nah, not strong enough. Louis XIV, oh yeah, he's strong enough. Louis XIV, the Sun King, the King of France that built the palace at Versailles. Louis XIV is strong enough to get rid of the Edict of Nantes, and he did. And therefore, brothers and sisters, we now come to 1685. The witnesses began to be slain in 1572, up, down, up, down, up, down. 113 years later, 1685, and in comes Louis XIV. Get rid of the Edict of Nantes, and he did. He revoked the Edict of Nantes, brothers and sisters, and now the witnesses are completely politically gagged. They're killed, and then they fall and they lay in the street for 3.5 days. Now, I'm Louis XIV. You're the Huguenots. Better to be you than me, let me tell you. Now, this is what I'm going to say to you, because this is what Louis XIV said to the Huguenots in 1685, when the witnesses were totally politically and religiously gone. I'm Louis XIV, you're the Huguenots. Get out of France. Take your pigs, your chooks, grandma, grandpa, your cousins, your kids, get out. You've got 15 days to get out of France if you don't become converted or Catholic. And over 1 million Huguenots fled. Some went to America, some went to South Africa, some went to England. They were the lawyers, they were the tradesmen, they were the fibre of the nation, and they fled. Because Louis XIV said, get out of France if you're not going to become a Catholic. And that's when, brothers and sisters, the revocation of the Edict of Nantes took place. That's when finally the witnesses were totally, completely dead, and that's where we pick up the record in verse 8, where the dead bodies lay in the street for 3.5 days from 1685, where they're now dead, and they would come back to life in 1789. They would lay in the street for 3.5 days. Now let's say something here. We've been talking about Henry of Navarre, Henry IV, Louis XIII, Louis XIV. We've been talking about Catherine de' Medici. We've been talking about France and Huguenots. Is this chapter really about France? Are we stretching this, brothers and sisters? Have a look at this verse here. Verse 8 and verse 13. Let's build up the folio of evidence to show unequivocally that this chapter is about France. Verse 8 and verse 13. This is rock solid stuff. This is rock solid, immovable ground that it's about France. Well, let's read the verse. Is it about France? Verse 8 says this. And their dead bodies, 1685, shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. Does that tell you anything about France? No. There's nothing about France there. All right, well, let's explore it a bit more. Their dead bodies of the witnesses would lie in the street of the great city. What's the great city? Oh, brothers and sisters, it's Rome. Of course it's Rome. Heaps of quotations in the Apocalypse. Revelation 14 verse 8, alas, alas, that great city is gone. Revelation 16 verse 19, and that great city was divided into 3 parts, Rome. Revelation 17 verse 18, and the woman that sat upon the beast is that great city that reigns over the kings of the earth, which Rome did in the times of John. Revelation 18 verse 10 and 16, that great city, her hour of judgment is come. So, here we've got a verse that we think might give us a clue that chapter 11 is about France. The great city just tells us something about Rome. Still haven't got anywhere about France. You know, brothers and sisters, there was an emperor who was the first emperor of the third seal in chapter 6. Chapter 6, seal 1, white horse. Seal 2, red horse. Seal 3, black horse. Black horse, the black horse period of pagan Rome in Revelation 6 was awful. Awful distress, awful famine, terrible taxation. So the first emperor of the black horse period, his name was Caracalla. He brought terrible taxation to the Roman world, and he was going to bring a tax for the city of Rome. So if you lived in the city of Rome, you got taxed. There were people out in the provinces who says, no, you can't touch us. We don't live in the city of Rome. We don't have to pay our taxes. Caracalla says, oh yeah, I'm now going to make the city of Rome the empire. So the borders of the empire of Rome have now become the city of Rome. Pay your taxes. So here we are, brothers and sisters, building up this evidence. The frontiers of the empire became the limits of the city of Rome, instituted, declared by the Emperor Caracalla, the first emperor of the Black Horse period of Revelation chapter 6. All right, so we've got the great city is the empire of Rome. Still not enough evidence here, brothers and sisters. Well, let's have a look at this. The dead bodies, the witnesses, would lie in the broad plateau of the empire of Rome. There'd be a major thoroughfare in the empire of Rome in which the dead bodies would fall. And this broad plateau was France. And France was Papal Rome's special protector. France was the principal thoroughfare of the great city of spiritual Babylon. And France, brothers and sisters, was called the eldest son of the Catholic Church. Why? 10 barbaric tribes, 10 barbaric kingdoms that became the basis of Europe. And of those 10 barbaric kingdoms, the Franks, France, were the first to be converted to Catholicism through Clovis, the barbaric Frank, who became converted to a Catholic. So that's why France was called the eldest son of the church, because France was the first of the barbarians to be converted to Catholicism. So we've got a broad support thoroughfare for Rome. Still not enough evidence, brothers and sisters. Are we really talking about France? Well, have a look at this verse here, verse 13. In the great earthquake, a 10th part of the city fell. 10 barbarian kingdoms, and you've got Europe. And 1/10 of those barbaric kingdoms fell. France, the Franks. France fell in the French Revolution. What an amazing thing. Are we stretching it, brothers and sisters? Look at this. In 1639, way before the French Revolution, Thomas Goodwin said this: by the 10th part of the city, quoting Revelation 11, I understand some 1/10 part of Europe. In 1689, Pierre Giraud said, the 10th part of the city which here fell will at some future time appear to be the kingdom of France. That's 1689. Where a revolution will take place about the year 1785. Wasn't far away, only 4 years away. And the separation from the papacy will follow. Do we need more proof? In 1687, Jacques Philippot said this: as the King of France did his utmost to enhance the glory of popery, the broad plateau, the broad support for Roman Catholicism in Europe, which was the great city, well, as the King of France did his utmost to enhance the glory of popery, it will be the King of France who will mostly contribute to her ruin. And yes, you did, King Louis XVI. I take it for granted first that the city here mentioned is Babylon, that is the Papal Empire, the Church of Rome, the empire of the Antichrist. They're the witnesses speaking, brothers and sisters. They're the anti-papal witnesses. They knew who the Antichrist was. And they could read sections of the book of Revelation and go, I can see what that is. Make sure our eyes are open far more than what these witnesses were. Why should there be any hesitation in concluding that this 10th part of the city which shall fall is France? Do we need any more proof? Oh yes. Let's have a look at some more. These witnesses would fall down in the broad plateau. Did you notice before that in the words of Revelation chapter 11 and verse 8, it said, this broad thoroughfare which is France, where our Lord was crucified? Now Jesus was crucified in Judea. Jesus was crucified in a street in the Roman world. France was 1/10 of the Roman Catholic world. You see how that verse works? Egypt and Sodom. Interesting things about that. Time doesn't permit that we walk down that path. All right, brothers and sisters, more proof that we're talking about France and the Great Revolution of France. Well, here we are, 1685. Louis XIV, the Sun King, has said, get out. He's revoked the Edict of Nantes, or the Edict of Nantes, and now the dead bodies, according to the symbology of Revelation 11, are going to lay in the broad plateau, France, and they're going to come back where they fell down in France, and they're going to lay there for 3.5 days. Now, we do have a little bit of time up our sleeve. You beauty. Now's when I really need you. I really need you with me. If you've been taking a little bit of a nap, now's the time to wake up. All right? I'm looking at you. I'm looking at all of you now. You need to stay with me for the next 4 minutes. This is probably one of the most challenging time periods in the book of Revelation. 3.5 days. Has anybody got anything written in their margin about... I've got up there 3.5 days. The dead bodies will lie on the street for 3.5. I've got up there, it's equivalent to 105 years. Has anybody got that in their margin? There'd be a few here that got it in there. Can you explain it? Sometimes you do that. You listen to classes, especially on classes on prophecy, you think, oh, that sounds neat. Yeah, I get that. You write it, and then about 3 months later you go, I have no idea why I wrote that. In fact, I don't even know where I got it from. And then you get out your eraser and you rub it out because I don't get it. But if you've got it written in your mind, we've got to be able to explain it. And we've got to be able to explain this with credibility. All right? Not just say, oh, look, it kind of works. History's sort of mixed. No, not good enough, right? We've got to be able to explain this with credibility. 3.5 days is 105 years. Well, historically, it fits. I mean, 1685, kind of like a neat fit, but that's not good enough. 1685 through to 1789 is 105 years. Oh, yes, it is. I'll tell you this. When we start Revelation 11, we've got 42 months. That's easy. 42 months, 30 days in a month, 30 multiplied by 42 is 1,260. A day for a year, 1,260 years. That's easy. If God, and I say this reverently, if God had maintained that same formula, right, he would have transferred it up into verse 8 and said the dead bodies lay in the street for 3.5 months. And you would have went, I get that, I've been there before. 3.5 months, 30 days in a month, 30 multiplied by 3.5 is 105 days. 105 days, that's easy. 3.5 months. Or God could have said, the dead body's laid in the street for 105 days. Oh, that's easy, I've been there before. Day for a year. Why didn't God do that? Why didn't he keep that same formula? It would have been all easy. Because it does not fit, brothers and sisters, the decorum of the symbol. It's ridiculous to say that dead bodies fell down and they lay it out there in the open and they were there for 3.5 months and people were walking around them and the dogs were coming and sniffing them and birds. No! You can't have bodies laying in the street for 3.5 months. Jesus says the body stinks after the 4th day. And before they corrupted, God said they're going to lay in the street before they corrupt for 3.5 days. Not 4, 3.5. So God squeezed and squeezed and brought it to a symbol that fits appropriate behaviour. Does that make sense? You can't have dead bodies laying in a street and have them come back non-corrupted while they're laying there. Because people are walking around and they can see them. And I'll show you how that works. These dead bodies were there. They were there. They weren't corrupted. They didn't disappear. They were there waiting to come back to life. All right? Well, how then do we get 3.5 days to equal 105 years? Well, God uses lunar days. You're probably thinking, what? If you've never heard this before, what are you talking about, Steve? Lunar days. We've already got a precedent, brothers and sisters, in verses 1 and 2. 42 months, 30 days in a month is based on the lunar cycle. There's already a lunar flavour in verses 1 and 2. So God uses lunar days. And this is what happens. You see, brothers and sisters, the earth revolves on its axis once every 24 hours. One of our days, 24 hours. But the moon tracks around the earth once every one of our 30 days. Oh, it's 28 point something, but it's rounded off in the Jewish calendar to 30. So the moon revolves around the earth once every 30 of our days. Here we go. Here's a lunar day. 30 of ours. Here's the second lunar day. 60 of ours. Here's the third lunar day. 90 of ours. Here's a half a lunar day. 15 plus 90, 105 of our days. Make sense? One lunar day, 30 of ours. 2 lunar days, 60. 3 lunar days, we're now to 90. A half a lunar day, which is 15, 90 plus 15 is 105. And therefore, brothers and sisters, to make it fit the decorum of the symbol, we've got 105 of our days, which is 3.5 lunar days. Therefore, the bodies remained in a state of non-decay. They could not therefore be called the death of 105 days, so God shrinks that to 3.5 to fit the decorum of the symbol. And the decorum of the symbol requires that solution. So from 1685 to 1789, 105 years, and it's recorded in Revelation 11 as 3.5 days. And there it is. The time it takes for the moon to revolve once around the earth is 30 of hours. 1 lunar day, 30 of hours, 3.5 lunar days is 105 days, and on a day for a year principle, it's 105 years. Are we stretching this? Let's add more evidence and weight to it, brothers and sisters. There was a French historian by the name of Belloc, and he said this. He didn't read Eureka, he wasn't reading Revelation 11. He said this, in Belloc, The French Revolution, page 231. The Huguenots, though no longer permitted to exist as a state within a state, remained for the 100 years between the revocation of the Edict of Nantes and the outbreak of the French Revolution, look, a powerful and ever watchful body. They weren't corrupted. The birds didn't pick them, the dogs didn't ravage them. They were there waiting to come back to life, brothers and sisters, in the French Revolution. What an astounding thing. And when I read historical statements like that, I quiver sometimes, brothers and sisters. I wonder whether there's an angel there just guiding the pen of that historian so that we can sit here today and be thrilled with the way God and the angels worked in the times of the kingdom of men, so that one day we can finish that work. What an amazing thing. Well, wow, this is great. This is so good. Almost on time. Who's the next speaker? Brother Steve? Is he? Is he here yet? No, he's not. Let's keep going. All right, brothers and sisters. Now here we are. The witnesses have come back to life. And we're now 1789. The French Revolution is about to take place. And there's Louis XVI. There he is sitting up there. And he's assembled the French Parliament. And we pick up the words in verse 12 of Revelation 11. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. The heaven here is the political heavens of France. Here are the assembled Parliament. And in the same hour there was a great earthquake, and a tenth part of the city fell. So here we are, brothers and sisters. Here's Louis XVI, and he's in trouble. He is in trouble. There's a train that's out of control, and it's coming down the railway tracks. And Louis XVI is saying, I'm in trouble. We've got to get food on the table. We've got to get all of this stuff sorted out. We're broke. We're going down the drain very quickly. And so he assembles his parliament, and he says, what are we going to do? And they all came together, brothers and sisters. As the Estates General, they convened on May the 5th, 1789 by Louis XVI at Versailles in a desperate attempt to stave off civil unrest. There they are, they call them up, come up hither and gather as a political body to try and sort the place out. Now this General Assembly, or Estates General, was established in 302. And it was made up of 3 groups or estates: clergy, nobility and the commoners. And when they voted, they had a neat voting system. When the clergy and nobility and the commoners got together and voted, you got 1 vote per estate. So if there were 500 Catholics, one vote. If there were 2,000 nobility, one vote. If there were 25,000 commoners, one vote. And the clergy and the nobility made up 2% of France. 98% of France were the commoners. So they'd have a vote, they'd talk about something, they'd get together, and the clergy and nobility say, yeah, we go that way. The commoners say, no, well, sorry, you're outvoted 2-1. That's the way it is. All right? So they're going down the drain, is France, and they call the Estates General together, and they're discussing, and they didn't talk about bread or the lack thereof. They didn't talk about the political crisis. They didn't talk about the economic crisis. They had meeting after meeting after meeting, week after week, month after month, and all they talked about, how are we going to vote? Because they didn't trust each other. How are we going to vote? And in the end, the commoners said, we make up 98%. We're going it alone. And they did. The commoners of the Third Estate voted on the 17th of June to make themselves a permanent National Assembly with or without the other two. And Louis's efforts to repress the new assembly caused widespread rioting and ushered in the French Revolution. Well, brothers and sisters, we finish our class on this note. They stood on their feet. So here they were. The new National Assembly, the commoners, published a decree proclaiming liberty of opinions, religious and political, and the property of the exiled Huguenots unsold at that date would be restored to their rightful heirs. Oh, we finish on this note to just show you how this chapter is about the events that took place in France. Look at this verse, brothers and sisters, as we finish our study. Look at it. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying, the political assembly of the parliament in France, they said, come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And the same hour there was a great earthquake, French Revolution, and a 10th part of the city fell, France. And in the earthquake were slain not 7,000 men. What's your margin say? Names of men. In the French Revolution, names of men were slain. 7 is the number of completeness. In the French Revolution, complete names were obliterated. And of course they were, because in the French Revolution, you were not allowed to have a title. You couldn't call yourself a marquis. You couldn't call yourself a duke. You couldn't call yourself a count. You couldn't say mademoiselle. You couldn't say madame. Even Louis XVI was not allowed to be addressed as sire or your majesty. No one had names. In the French Revolution, they completely obliterated titles. The Bible says, and the names of men were gone in the French Revolution. What an astounding thing, brothers and sisters. And all you were called in the French Revolution was citizen. Hello, citizen Louis. And here we are, brothers and sisters, in the time of terror. To be an aristocrat meant death. To be a suspect of an aristocrat meant death. Watch out for Skip, he's a count. Pew! He's gone. The breath of opposition. A breath of opposition to any course of the events meant death. Here we are, brothers, in the reign of terror in 1793. And this is the scene for the opening of Revelation 16. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. And we are therefore, God willing, going to step now into Revelation 16, the vials, and use Revelation 11 as a springboard. So God willing, tomorrow morning, brothers and sisters, our title will be, as we step now, having been sprung out of chapter 11, as we step into Revelation 16, go your ways and pour out the vials of the wrath of God.